Today, we dig into the world of 111 and 999 and the emergency operations centres run by the ambulance service. Hopefully, you'll never need to ring 999, but if you do, you'll talk to experienced, empathetic control officers who have been trained to get you the care you need quickly. For 111, time is not as critical, but still the same applies. Caring, informed professionals who can help navigate you to the care you need. I'm Catherine Levin, editor of Emergency Services Times, and in this episode, we'll hear from Dan Ainsworth, Director of Operations at the North West Ambulance Service. He provides great insights into the world of the EOC. He oversees operations, and that includes 900 call handlers in a service where they handle around 10,000 calls a day. He brings 18 years' experience to the top job and has worked his way up to truly understand the system. And, as you'll hear, he and his team are innovating and developing the services to not only drive efficiency, but improve patient care. We kick off our chat by hearing about how NHS Direct evolved into the 111 service we know today.
NHS Direct was established to principally, there were two services that 111 became. So you'd have GP out of hours services locally and NHS Direct. And when 111 was nationally commissioned, NHS Direct stepped into about 50% of the country. And over a period of time, NHS Direct ceased to exist. And the majority of that moved into the ambulance sector, but not all. I think it's about half and half. Ambulance services deliver 111 versus other organisations.
So I live in London, if I ring 111, I get London Ambulance Service. But is that like 999 being redirected? So it going into a central thing and then directed into the right ambulance service? How does it work when you pick up the phone and do that? Yeah,
so the ones and the nine systems are completely separate. They both work in a similar methodology of a national cloud will identify where you are en route to the appropriate service. But with 111, it will vary depending on where you are in the country. So in some areas of the country, like London and the North West, if you dial 111, you'll be routed into a control room that is run by the ambulance service. But if you're in other parts of the country, it'll be run by a different type of service. So that it could be a large-scale out-of-hours provider or something similar.
Yeah, so because I sort of had this idea that it was all going to the same place, but it's quite clear that those are quite separate. So in terms of managing demand, we think of 999, the demand level of 999 being very different to the demand level of 111. Can you give us a sense of volume here? If we were to look nationally, how many calls go into 111 and how many calls go into 999? I mean, you could be specific to NWAS if you want, but I'm quite interested in the national figure as well. What's the balance like between the two?
Yeah, so 111 is the busiest service of the two from a call volume perspective. And I think the North West is a reasonably good comparator, as the North West Ambulance Service provide the only total regional 111 service. So to give you a sense, on a daily basis, the average call volume for the North West for 111 is about 5,300 calls a day, and 999 is about 4,000 calls a day. So it's certainly busier, but it's also more nuanced in 111. So 999, relatively speaking, we have busy days, but relatively speaking, the variation between your less busy and busy days is a few hundred calls, potentially a little bit more. 111 is very different. So 111, if we take the busiest day of the year, normally is Boxing Day. 111 in the Northwest can go from that 5,000 to well over 12,000 calls in a day. I think with 111, the primary thing that drives activity is your doctor isn't open. So when GPs are closed, 111 is busier. But what we have seen in the last few years is historically the daytimes were nowhere near as busy for 111. But actually, we've seen big increases in demand in 111 in sort of the hours around 9, 10, 11 in the morning, 4, 5, 6 at night. So it has changed over time, and a lot of that changed post-COVID.
And do you think that people are using 111 because they just think they can't get a GP appointment? So that's just like almost like the first port of call rather than the GP. Is that where you're picking up that demand in the morning after that sort of, they can't get hold of the GP, so going straight to you? Is that?
I think it's probably a reflection of two things. So without doubt, public awareness of 111 as a service has increased significantly since its inception. So certainly I think one of the key messages that we all drive is that if you're not sure what to do, dial 111. I think it's also reasonable, though, that the increases in demand we've seen between 9 and 11 in the morning, and that's reflected nationally, do reflect some of the challenges patients face in some areas in terms of being able to get an appointment with the GP, accessing primary care, because they, along with us, have continued to get busier over time.
Yes, and I was going to ask you about winter pressures, but you're almost like describing it there with your example of Boxing Day. I assume that's because things have happened at Christmas. I said 12,000. That is a massive jump, isn't it, from your average of 5,000 to 12,000? How do you stand up the resources to be able to deal with that? Did you know that was going to happen, so you put more people in the EOC?
Yeah, so that we want for 111. So yes, we do. I mean, principally the kind of 4-day period generally you see at Christmas, it's accumulation for patients that for that 4-day period where it's more difficult to access primary care as an example, what we will see is demand will increase. So, unfortunately for our teams, but they are amazing people, what we will do is we will reduce leave, we will increase our workforce numbers to maximise the number of staff that we can have working across 111. So probably to give you a feel, early hours of the morning, we may have 30, 40 call handlers working, and we can scale that up to almost nearly 200 at that peak period.
Goodness, where do you find them all? That's a big change. I mean, how many call handlers do you have then in total if you can go from 30 to 40 to 200 to deal with these pressures? And what are they doing when they're not doing the pressures?
Yeah, so across 111 and 999, we've probably got about 900 call handlers across 111 and 999 in the Northwest. So we do a number of things. So we'll be flexible in terms of our leave. So fortunately, we're not busy in the summer. More people want to go on holiday in the summer, and therefore we can balance out winter with the summer in that respect. We profile our staff. So we recruit people for 111 where more weekend working is required. And ultimately, I think what we've become better and better at doing is striking the balance when you've got such scale and volume of one thing I've learned as a manager is one rota pattern for one person is great for one, but could be awful for somebody else. So we've tried to use our flexible approach with our workforce in how we roster people to actually deal with both issues, give people that work-life balance and make sure we've got the right people when we need them. The other element we've got is we use a workforce management tool, which is a very clever, intelligent piece of software that allows us to map our demand, forecast our demand, and roster our staff to meet that as much as we can.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask you about the technology. How do you manage to do that based on what you know from the past, what you predict in the future, all the externalities that affect you in terms of weather and events and time of year and all of that? And does your system ingest all of that in order to give you your optimum staffing pattern? And is it some kind of AI? It sounds very fancy.
So from a call handling perspective, i.e. mapping how many calls we think we're going to receive in a given hour, day, etc., how long we think it'll take to manage each call, all of that is through the technology. So the forecasting is really accurate. If I'm honest, the call forecasting is much more accurate and predictable sometimes than when you have a workforce of 400 or 500 people to roster in it, because 400, 500 people have very different challenges in life. So your sickness can increase or your other factors can increase as well. So that does use a form of predictive technology within that. But you also need some really brilliant people to use the system. So the way I describe it almost is it's a bit like having a Formula One car, but if you put me in it, it would not perform like a Formula One car. Whereas fortunately, we've got some real experts in terms of that workforce planning space that assist us with that.
What a lovely analogy. So you've got all of these amazing Formula One drivers in your EOC. I think they'll be delighted to hear that. So those people, in terms of recruitment, do you find it easy to fill the roles in the EOC space because of that flexibility? But it's quite demanding, I imagine, also quite stressful job to have. How do you recruit people in and how do you get them to stay?
Yeah, so I think just picking up both elements of that, anybody who's worked in the EOC environment would recognise both 111 and 999 have some real challenges in terms of the work. So from a 999 perspective, as I'm sure everybody can imagine, that you can be faced with some incredibly tragic, stressful, difficult scenarios. And it does take a really special type of person who can manage those demands and those pressures. And from a 111 perspective, it's incredibly busy. And again, the variability in terms of what you could be presented with, literally from taking a patient who just doesn't know where to get a prescription, and your next call could be a patient who requires an ambulance. So having that ability to switch and know how reactive, responsive versus the patients you need to take a little bit more time with or be a bit more supportive with is a real skill. So what you'll find, I think, if you talk to anybody, either who works in the emergency kind of call centre environment or the broad commercial call centre environment, is retention of your workforce and sickness rates will always be higher than your kind of my operational workforce working on out there on vehicles. And it is the nature of the kind of environment that people work in. What we've found over time is we've become better at recruiting the right people. So certainly we don't struggle in terms of a pool of people wanting to come and work in the ambulance service. I think it's recognised that I'm definitely not special, and people tell me that all the time, but I'm definitely not special. But I think I'm an example of somebody who started their life working on the phone, and through the opportunities the organisation give, can see a real opportunity to have a career within the ambulance service. What we've worked really hard at is giving people as much a real world sense of what the job will be before they do the job. So they can come in and see the environment. We'll talk to them about the nature of the calls, and we do a number of assessments through the recruitment process to help us best match people. And we're really upfront and honest about the kind of type of work and the shifts. So ultimately, we want people to come in with their eyes wide open and understand the opportunities, the great stuff and the challenges.
Yeah, so essentially what you're describing is a culture in which you want people to thrive, but within an environment which is very up and down, lots of stressful situations. So in that assessment centre, you're simulating some of that, to kind of give them a sense of this is what it will be like in the real world. Is it the right place for you? Is that what you're trying to do? Exactly
that. I mean, I think as with any simulation, especially, it's really hard to simulate. You're on your fourth night shift of 4, you're in those last few hours and you've got a really difficult call. But ultimately, I think we've become better and better in terms of identifying those people whose skill sets, values, drivers are best set and best fit for the role. And what we've certainly seen over the last few years is the number of staff leaving us has reduced significantly. And that obviously puts us in a better position to do a good job for patients as well.
Yes, it's also incredibly costly, keep recruiting people all the time. So doing the job right first time will definitely be the way to do it. I want to talk to you about efficiencies in a minute, but just on the people side, just before we close off that side of things, the people who are coming to you to help, for you to help them, whether they're coming through 111 or 999, in terms of that career that you mapped out at the beginning, how much have you seen change in terms of the demands and the expectations people have of your service? Could you sort of sense patterns over time? The people who are calling today, they're very different to the people who are calling, say, 10 years ago in terms of what they're calling about and what their expectations are.
So I don't think necessarily there's been a fundamental shift in the type of patients who call either 999 or 111. I think the reality is that the majority of people who ring 999 do so because they're ultimately having pretty much the worst day they've had in their life. I think one thing from the 999 service is that as we've seen call volume increase year on year on year, and working with our hospital partners, it's really important that patients do understand that if you went back 15, 20 years, if you called 999, it's a good chance an ambulance arrived and it's a good chance the ambulance took you to hospital, whether that was the best thing for you or not. Certainly these days, less than 50% of patients who ring 999 will attend an emergency department in an ambulance. And that's because we have several hundred now, I've probably got about 250, 300 clinical staff working within the control environment. So they will contact patients, they'll assess them. We've got really good referral pathways out into the wider NHS. of the patients we then go and see, around a quarter of all patients that we manage, we will refer into a service on scene. So I think that element is the shift in the service provision, the expectations from patients. So certainly we say, one of our strap lines that we're really clear with patients when we communicate is that, dialing 999 doesn't necessarily mean that that an ambulance is the best thing for you. I think that's the biggest change probably over the last few years.
And the environment you described there with people doing effectively triage, is that something you put more resource in recent years in order to sort of offset that demand? Because to send somebody in an ambulance is very expensive and not, as you say, not necessarily right for them. So are you putting more resource into that to enable to release capacity and time for the ambulances to be used?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the area, if you spoke to any of my kind of colleagues across the country, director of ops, of where probably the greatest investment, or certainly the growth in investment, is clinicians working in controlled environments. So, I mean, we have invested significantly. We offer an advanced practice program. We offer rotational working programs. So half the time you work operationally patient facing, half the time you work within the controlled environment. We now have really senior clinicians working in the controlled environment. So it's both from a triage perspective, i.e. bringing patients back and assessing their need, but also we are a really busy service. So it's really important we have that senior clinical oversight of patients when they are waiting for an ambulance to make sure that we can safely manage patients in the community as well.
And how does that work in the control room? So if you've got somebody on the phone to call, doing the triaging that we were talking about, is there somebody senior? Are they listening into the calls? How do they know? Are they getting some kind of summary, or how does that work in practice in the background?
So for the 999 service, for our service and all services, unfortunately, at times, patients who need an ambulance will wait for the ambulance. So they'll be in a waiting stack, so a list of patients in time order. So our senior clinicians will be reviewing those patients by their case notes, by the inputs. They'll be able to pick out those patients who are at highest risk. So that could be something as simple as an elderly patient who's outside, who's fallen. So their need, from a triage perspective, it may align to somebody who's inside, but obviously the environment would dictate we need to go and see that person sooner, all the way up to patients who have potentially comorbidities, complexities. So it's both approaches. One is looking at kind of patients who are already waiting for an ambulance, and the others are making that individualized call to patients to see what the best options are for them.
And that stacking system you just talked about, is that all done manually, or is the systems, the technology behind all of this kind of going, actually based on these criteria, this person is number one in the list? Does it kind of determine risk based on factors that you already know about?
Yeah, so our call handling teams will triage patients, and effectively in the 999 service, you will be categorised as anything from a category 1 to a category 5. Category 1 calls, to give you a sense, about 10% of our work, and they are patients in active cardiac arrest, patients who are actively fitting, for example, patients who've been shot. So the real extremists of presentation. And we get to those patients from point of call in 7 minutes. So they are our absolute sort of first priority. Category 5 patients are patients who it's been deemed by assessment won't need an ambulance. So we redirect those patients. And then you've got a big pool of patients in between. So patients will wait in time order. So how long have they been waiting and what category? So starting with the highest category first, and that's how we kind of manage our demand.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the emergency services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
When you were talking just now about the stacking and the looking at people, it made me think about ambient voice technology. And I spoke to David Davis about this at London Ambulance Service, about how that using kind of AI tools to summarise what's happening in the ambulance so that it can go into the system so you don't have to sit and type things. And that sort of sense of driving efficiencies, wanting to make better use of clinical time by taking away the admin. How much kind of work are you doing in your service to reduce the amount of paperwork and maximise clinical time using technology?
So I think a really good example where I think certainly led the 111 sector was within 111 service, patients have the potential to wait to be answered. Obviously with the 999 service, patients we answer immediately. So one of the things we introduced was a voice technology. So while the patient is waiting to be answered, they will tell the system their demographics, so their name, their doctor, their address, the date of birth, and that will be immediately available on screen for the call handler when the patient's connected. So that saves significant time for us and creates capacity. Another really good example of where we use technology is for our category 1 patients, we have an ability through the call handler to utilise some keywords and key statements that will predict that the patient will be a category 1 response. We then use our computer system to automatically dispatch a vehicle. So to give you a sense of it, currently, if a patient rings 999 and we predict and automatically dispatch, we can have a vehicle physically moving to them in about 35 seconds from the point you dialed 999. So that's certainly a couple of the areas where we use the technology. And we are looking further around risk stratification and some other opportunities. We certainly think some of the work that London have done is interesting and presents some real opportunities for the sector.
Yeah, so what you're talking about are kind of innovations, but are they all bolted onto your software, which is running your control room, whatever that is? Or are they innovations within the existing technology environment that you have? I'm just thinking about those really small innovative suppliers on the edges who often don't get much chance to show what they're doing because they're so small and hard to get into large organisations. So how are you kind of bringing in those innovations? What's the route into NWAS that you've used for those?
So generally our innovations changes to the systems that we currently use, I think is probably the best way to describe it. And I think historically, that's broadly how we've delivered those change. I think your point around horizon scanning and seeing those new opportunities emerging, I think is something that all NHS services, and certainly in my world where so much of it is system driven, we are really starting to try and use our digital colleagues to do that horizon scanning. And I think one thing I've learned as an operational person is we tend to think what we say is we want that. Whereas what we've got to get a lot better at doing is describing the problem we're trying to solve and allowing those clever digital folk to actually help us solve those problems as opposed to us just saying what we want.
Yes, you're right. That's very much my world where we ask people to say, what is the problem you need to solve? And then industry can kind of come along and say, actually, it might be this, it might be that. It's interesting. It made me think again about what's happening in Wales, in the Welsh Ambulance Service with their 111 service. Now they've introduced agents, AI agents, which sounds like little people in their system, but effectively what it means is that they're using their walled garden of knowledge, clinical information, to help people to use chatbots online on 111 service for NHS Wales to get lots of information before they potentially get to a human. So I wondered if you were thinking about using something like that, or whether that's something that's happened to NHS 111 nationally, or whether something you're thinking about just to sort of see what they're doing in Wales and that works for you.
Yeah, so certainly in England, there is NHS Online, which is effectively a replication, it's pretty much of the triage assessment and referral methodologies that you can access over the phone. So certainly one of the things we really encourage patients to use is the online service. It's really effective, it's safe. And I think one of the things the public don't always know is that it can make those direct referrals for you into services. So I think I'm not as au fait with NHS Direct Wales because it's a separate service, but I think it's probably a similar opportunity that patients have. The other thing which is slightly more straightforward but really effective is we are able to stream mental health patients when they dial 111 by pressing 2, and they are automatically routed based on their location over through the telephony routing into their local mental health service. So I think there's some real opportunities around that as well.
I'm interested that you talked there about mental health calls, and with the right care, right person approach of having police officers no longer dealing with people with mental health crisis and moving them into the health system in terms of having the right people to deal with their needs. Do you see rising demand through the EAC in terms of people getting in touch with 111, 999 for mental health? Has that changed in recent times, or has that just been going up over time? I'm not sure.
So I think certainly when Right Care, Right Person was being introduced initially, and we were, one of our police services were one of the first, they weren't the first, but one of them, we did have some real concerns, primarily for making sure that patients had a service to access and a suitable service. So I think we spent a lot of time working collaboratively with mental health, with police, with wider NHS partners in terms of planning. In reality, we've not seen a kind of spike or exponential growth in mental health demand post Right Care, Right Person. We have seen, though, over the last few years, an increase in demand from patients presenting exclusively with a mental health need. But there's no direct correlation with the onset of Right Care, Right Person.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. I think I was thinking of Humberside. I think they were in your patch. Yes.
No, but they were first, I think,
Yes.
They were first.
That's right. So in terms of thinking about you talked a lot there about the time at which you need to respond for 999, the way that 111 works. But nationally, are you judged on this in terms of the numbers? So how quickly you respond, how many people? Is it all quantitative, all about the numbers, or is there any qualitative thing about the service? And I'm also interested in the CQC, so the Care Quality Commission, what it would have to say about your service as well. So what sort of frameworks are you having to work within to make sure that your performance is where it should be?
Yeah, so there absolutely are, for the 999 service and the 111 service, performance indicators. So that covers everything from answering the phone to how quickly we respond to each category of patient. In 111, it's very similar in terms of how quickly we answer the phone, how effectively we are in referring patients. We focus a lot as well on outcome data. So in terms of our patients being referred to the right places, there are also clinical indicators that look at patient outcomes. And then as an organisation, we invest a lot of time in terms of the quality of our service. So we look at both our positives and our indicators where things don't go well. So be that complaints, be that internally raised incidents. And we also invest a huge amount of time in terms of our own internal quality assurance. So there's 111, for example, every call handler, if they're in their first 6 to 12 months, will have 5 audits completed, fed back to them a month. All of the staff will have 3. So when you think about the number of staff we've got, we do thousands. That's the same for the 999 service. So we do thousands of audits a month from our quality assurance perspective. So I think we recognise that nationally, the majority of the measures look at speed from a quantitative perspective, but ultimately, do patients want us to get there quickly? Absolutely. But actually, what really matters to patients is the quality of care, the compassion that we show, treating patients as individuals, and certainly a big focus for us is around cultural awareness and understanding as we serve a really diverse population.
Interesting. A couple of things that come out from what you've said there. One was around this idea of referrals. So when someone's in crisis and they're coming through 999 and they end up in hospital, once they're in the system, you're job has finished to a certain extent. So how do you know that patient, when they're going through the health system, the totality of their experience? Your judgment there was around the quality of the experience they have with you, but then they add all those other experiences to it. How will you ever know what their experience has been like till they come out the other side?
At the moment, only in certain circumstances. So an area that is tracked through the patient journey is if a patient was in active cardiac arrest, whether they resuscitated. This is what we call survival to discharge. And so we are able to map through where we've been involved with a patient, they've been into hospital, they've survived for a period of time and been discharged, as an example. So cardiac arrest survival rates are a good example where we can measure the patient journey. I think over the next few years, there is a clear strategic aspiration from the NHS that our systems become better joined up, because actually, as you say, for us to truly know whether we are making the right interventions, whether the patient's in the right place, whether they've been effective, being able to map the patient through the entirety of the journey is really important. The NHS number is an enabler, but at the moment, there are still significant barriers in terms of being able to do that, capture that data, and then most importantly, analyse and understand and adapt the service provision to suit their needs.
Yes, and I think one of your issues you've got there, of course, is that you're all in different data pots, aren't you? So you've got your NWAS, all of your data, and then it's going off into all the hospitals. So you'd have to be able to talk to all the hospitals, and presumably that's the ambition of the Federated Data Platform, is to be able to do that. Are you using that in the Northwest?
So we do have some access in areas in terms of patient records. So 111 actually does have access in terms of we match patients to the NHS spine. So if there is critical information on there about a patient, we're able to pull that information through. From a 999 perspective, we do utilise kind of patient markers to support some of that. But in terms of that seamless transfer of information and our clinicians being able to access all the clinical information that they need, that there is still a journey to go in that respect, without a doubt. And I think your point is that those disparate systems do make that difficult. I think what we're looking to have is not necessarily an integrated NHS, but an interoperable NHS is the critical point.
Yes, we like the word interoperable in emergency services, so it's good to hear that there. So we're just going to come to the end of our conversation. I just have one more question for you, which is around your national role. So we've talked very much about NWAS, we've talked quite a bit about a 111 service, but in terms of all the people like you around the country and their different trusts, what are your sort of national concerns? If you had the kind of list of things that you're talking about that bother you all, what would be at the top of your list that you're talking about nationally?
So it's interesting you say that. So I previously was the chair of the National Heads of EOC group, and I'm part of the National Director of Ops group now, and I'll be stepping into the chair for that role from next month. So we've just sat down and looked at what our priorities we believe are for next year. So actually, it's really interesting. One of the things we're looking at is improving our ability to harness best practice across the sector. So I think over the last few years, we've become a much more open sector in terms of our ability and willingness to share that best practice and actually help other organisations embrace that. So we're looking increasingly around how do we maximise alternative pathways of care for patients. We are looking at where we can do digital innovation at scale. So a new national telephony platform is something that I think we are really keen to harness if we can. And interestingly, a really key area for us is our people. So we've just done this year through our Director of Ops group, I can't take credit, but 3 of my colleagues have done a huge analytical piece around our females working in the ambulance sector, and a huge data analysis that's given us some real areas of focus around how do we increase in certain roles within the ambulance sector, female leaders, improve representation. So that's another area that we're going to be looking to continue to work through next year as well.
Right, nice to get some insights into what you're talking about nationally in those conversations. Can I just clarify that national for you is just England?
So actually, through the Director of Ops group, it includes the devolved nations as well, Isle of Wight and Isle of Man, Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland. So we all work collaboratively together through the Association of Ambulance Chief Execs groups.
Excellent. Now that brings me to the end of my conversation with you today. Thank you so much for talking to me about 111-999. It's been fascinating to dig into it, which was my goal for speaking to you, to find out how complex it all is and just how much hard work goes on and the demands that you face and how you're dealing with that through technology and other approaches. So just leaves me to say thank you so much for joining me today, Dan.
It's my pleasure.
What I like about this conversation with Dan is the clarity of his explanations. When you're steeped in your world, it's easy to fall into technical terminology, but I do feel that he's done a good job to illuminate the world of the EOC. And while we spent time talking about systems, processes and technology innovation, at its heart, the EOC is all about people. The people who are having a really bad day and the people in the call centre exposed to the trauma of strangers and still going home to live their everyday lives. Looking after both is critical. I'm glad we found out about his world, and my thanks to Dan for taking time to talk to me. That's it from me for now. Episodes of this series drop every Tuesday. All our podcast episodes are sponsored by MSA Safety, and we're so grateful to them for their support. Be sure to share, like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times.